Hi, it's me, Daniel, and it's time for today's recap. Today is round 6 of the BCC Open. And I'll tell you now because I'm so excited. Today was my first win over a rated player in a classical time control game. Finally, finally, finally. Right. So at the moment, I've got 2.5 points out of the possible six. Right. I've got 2 wins and a draw. So my first win was against another unrated player, and then I got a draw and now a win over a rated player. So, wow. It's been really tough. And let's have a look at the game. Today's game was a shocker, as in, it was an opening that I had never, seriously, never, ever seen before. Okay, so I was playing black in this game, and white had moved knight f3. And then I thought, okay, let's go for symmetrical first, and then we'll see how it goes. So I played knight f6. What do you think is white's next move? Let's see if you've got the correct answer. White's next move was e4. Yeah. It turns out that this is an opening, and like a proper opening. It's actually under the Alekin's defense, and it's called the John Tracy Gambit. So the idea here is white sacrifices the e pawn on e4, right? Should black choose to take it, and then white then uses the time for chasing the knight to then develop their pieces faster and try to go for some sort of maybe tactical advantage because they've got the better piece development, right? So black can choose not to take the pawn, right? So they could go for, let's say, e5, which goes into the Petrov defense. Unfortunately, it's not an opening that I'm very familiar with. I don't often play this, so I thought, no. So I decided to take the pawn. And then white developed the bishop to c4, right? So I assume that white wants to move the pawn to d3, right? But it doesn't want to block the king bishop, so move the king's bishop to c4. So to avoid any unpleasant threats by the knight and bishop on the f7 pawn, I decided to just move d5. Move back, bishop, move back. And then I moved c6. I thought, well, I'm ahead by a pawn. Let's try to play a solid opening, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, yes, white now plays d3, chasing away the knight. And I moved it back to f6. White castles. Okay, and I was thinking of moving my pawn to e6, but like white, I didn't want my bishop to be trapped by the pawn, so I moved my bishop out first. Okay, and I thought, well, I'm ahead by a pawn, and since I'm going for a fairly solid pawn structure where bishops are not that useful, so I thought I'll just trade off my bishop for his knight. So I did that, and then I moved e6, preparing my black bishop to move out, and then possibly a castling. Okay, so white pins the knight. I defend with the bishop. So far, so good. Okay. So white moves the rook to the e file. I develop my knight. Okay, so I'm looking to see if white is going to push the d pawn to d4, right? Where I might castle kingside and then maybe go for c5. So white develops the knight. Okay, and here white is going for this diagonal, and I thought, well, that actually makes the white's black square bishop pretty powerful. So I decided, okay, let's have fun. Shall we trade? Right. White traded the bishop. Okay. Looking good so far. One pawn ahead still. And then it looks like white is planning to double rooks on the e file. So e5 pawn push, not a good idea. And I decided, well, I'm ahead by a pawn and let's have some fun. White's castled on the king side. And I thought I'll castle on the queen side and maybe go for a king side attack and we'll see how it goes. So white moves the queen, threatening the a7 pawn. So I have to move my king to defend it. And then white starts his attack rolling, a4. And I was like, oh dear. What should I do? What should I do? Right. So pushing one of the black pawns in front of the king is not a very good idea because it creates holes, and then white is able to move, say, to c4, right? Once you trade off the pawns, and then white's pieces start to come out, and they've got more mobility. And since I'm a pawn ahead, I'm trying to go for some sort of like solid pawn structure where it's a very close position, right? So I would like to avoid pawn trades for now. And I was thinking, and I was like, oh, what the heck? I'm ahead by a pawn, right? And one of the theories in gambits is you take a pawn from a gambit, and when the time is right, you give it back, right? And then you give the pawn back for some sort of compensation, maybe a positional advantage, or maybe the chance of an attack, like opening lines. And I thought that's what I'll go for. So I went g5. Dun, 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 dun. Right. So it's a free pawn. White's queen can take the pawn, but then after that, black would be able to move the rook and then attack down the g file against the white king. And then white would have to start defending on the king side, and that would help delay this pawn push on the a file. So white decides not to take the pawn, but moving the knight, 1, to help defend the king, and 2, right? Now, white has got 2 attackers on the g pawn. So I went g4, and oh, and then white moved the knight to e5. Okay, so here threatening a fork of the 2 rooks and the queen. And after a hard think, I was like, okay, fine. I'm still a pawn ahead, right? So here, it'll probably be a knight and queen trade. And since I'm a pawn ahead, and here I could influence white's pawn structure so that he's got 2 isolated pawns on the f and h files, I thought, yeah, going into the endgame, I would have an advantage. So let's go for it. So I took the knight, traded queens, traded pawn, and boom, rook to the g file. So the idea behind this is I'm doubling my rooks. So white's rook either has to run away, right, or trade. So white decided to trade rooks. And after a bit of a think, I decided to take with my h pawn. So I've got no isolated pawns, and all my pawns are linked together. Okay, and white starts to open up space for the bishop. right? And there was a period where I chose to defend passively, and here white was pushing the A and B pawns, and I was in a bit of a trouble, right? But in the end, I finally got to trade rooks, right? And here I had a bit of a nice positional tactic, if you will, right? So I threatened the bishop, and then I went down knight to b7. The idea is if the pawn were to move down to a6, the knight would then go to d6, attacking the b6 pawn. So if the bishop were to go here or here to defend the pawn, I could then move my king to attack the pawn again, and the b pawn falls. Once the b pawn falls, the a pawn falls, and I've got my a pawn aiming for the queening square. And finally, in this position, white resigned. And I breathed this huge sigh of relief because yesterday's game, if you remember, I was in a winning position in the middle game with a great winning attack. I missed two winning combinations, which would have ended either in mate, depending on what my opponent had moved. We would have either been mate, or I would have taken my opponent's queen. But I totally missed two times, right? And today I was just so worried that even though I was ahead by a pawn from move 2, right, I was so worried that I might just blunder something and then the game would just flip and I'll be losing. Okay, so at the end of the game, I was like, all right, and that's today's game, round 6 of the BCC Open, and I'll be seeing you tomorrow. Bye.